Hi, I'm Rose Parr, and I'm the author of So Healthy and Happy, Smart Ergonomics, Stretches, and More for Makers. What's the more, you ask? Well, in this book, we're going to look at everything that you can do to sew pain-free until you're 100 years old, because that is my goal, and that is what I'm going to help everybody that out there do. We're going to look at the lighting in your studio, the way that your stations, as I like to call them, your workstations, are set up in relation to each other. Of course, we're going to look at your cutting table, your pressing station, your sewing setup, and then we'll also get into some of the techniques you do to do these daily activities, whether it be rotary cutting or pressing or sewing, and how you best set up for that. In addition, there is a lot of stretches in it as well too. The first half is all the ergonomics that are involved, and the second half are the stretches. Now, I am certified in office ergonomics, which transfers beautifully to this. I've been a personal trainer for 16 years and helped a lot of people improve their posture, their range of motion, different areas like that. And so the stretches that I've designed for quilters, shall we say, for the reason that they're for sewists and quilters is that you don't have to get on the floor for any of them. And the book is beautiful, I must say. The illustrations are beautiful. All of the stretches are done in their sewing room, and so you can actually see people doing them within the sewing room, near their ironing board, whatever it's going to be. And that helps out a lot. So one thing that we're going to look at to start with today is your sewing machine and how you normally get set up for that. Now, there's a lot of people working from home these days, and so you've probably seen a lot of things on Instagram and YouTube and Facebook about their ergonomic setup within their home and how they're working from home. And that does transfer quite nicely to our sewing machine area because we are all going for that magic 90-degree number. And ergonomists will always talk about the 90-degree angle as being the most ergonomic. Keep in mind that that is a general rule. Sometimes it's actually 95 or 100. We never want it to be 85, but anything from 90, anything that's going to keep our shoulders down, that is the whole key. When your shoulders are down, usually everything above it is happier. And so when your shoulders are down, you're not getting tension, you're not getting headaches and things like that. Well, one of the quickest ways to bring your shoulders up is to have your sewing machine too high for you. And because then anytime you're sewing, you need to come up and over. And so if you're setting your sewing machine up on top of your table, then think about this. If this is my table and I'm now at 90 degrees, and I'm at 90 degrees to this table because that's where my sewing bed is, that's where I'm living, that's where I'm working. But let's say you're setting it up on your kitchen table and your sewing machine is now this high. Well, you've got to either lower that machine or raise yourself up to it. And when we're looking at chairs and how we're going to do to raise things, you can use cushions, you can raise the height of an office chair. There's a lot of different ways you can do that, and there's lots of different ways covered in the book as well. For me, even though I have a chair that does raise, I still find I just need that little bit more. And so I like using a folded blanket on here instead of a cushion, and I actually find it stays in place very nice for me, and that's just what works great for me. But let's say that I'm sewing at the kitchen table, and now all of a sudden my sewing machine is here, and I've got a dining room chair, and that's not going to, a little blanket's not going to work for that. So then just make sure that you have a cushion that will raise you enough so that, again, your arms can end up in this position. So ideally we're looking at, head over the shoulders, shoulders back and down, shoulders down, sitting up nice and tall, feet flat on the floor to get your bearings. And then your arms at 90 degrees or perhaps 95. And that's how you're going to begin your sewing journey. We're going to try to avoid doing any of this and getting in. And one thing that can help with that, depending on our age or the age of our eyes, let's just say, is readers. Readers are the simplest way to bring your work to you rather than you having to come to your work. So if you're sewing and you have to be looking down to see what you're doing, but you don't necessarily have to be looking in. Another thing that comes in quite handy, a lot of us are watching TV and movies and YouTube tutorials, attending workshops and classes in the quilting world, but a lot of us are doing things like that with our computers or our tablets nearby. First of all, make sure that your computer is raised so that when you're looking at it, you're trying to get as much as eye level as possible, and we're not looking down again. If you find that you're doing a lot of sewing with the computer on, with bright lights on to help, try the blue glasses. The lenses are actually yellow, but try them because they can be a help too. And I actually have a pair that this pair that has 0 magnification, and I tend to actually use it more on my computer. And then I have ones that are the same, but they have my 1.25 magnification that I do use at the sewing table. So just something to keep in mind, a little bit something extra to do with that. One thing that I am a big fan of is what I call spontaneous stretching. And that means every time you stop to think about whether or not you're going to change your bobbin thread, whether or not you're going to keep going, or should I do the border now, or should I work on something else, then you're going to stop and just give yourself a little stretch while you're thinking about things. That being said, if you've been at your machine for, the last 24 hours straight without getting up and moving, let's hope not. But if that's the case, then even before you do your spontaneous stretch, then maybe get in the habit of every time just pumping a little here, a few shoulder rolls, a few handshakes. It's about getting the blood moving. And so always keep that in mind. Stretch spontaneously whenever possible. And if you have been sewing for a long time, then just warm up a little bit before you do any of those stretches. Well, people use different methods to get comfortable at that, and people use different methods in a lot of areas in their sewing, cutting, pressing. So one thing that I have in the book is I have enlisted the aid of 18 other individuals to provide their favorite tips and tricks for sewing, or for healthy living, or for living pain-free, or for living to 100 and sewing to 100. Now, 15 of these individuals are quilting professionals, or quilters, not necessarily quilting professionals, and the other 3 are health and wellness professionals. What I've done with the quilting professionals is they've sent me all their favorite tips in terms of, it could be something as simple as, Jenny Doan likes to say, don't eat Cheetos while you're sewing unless you're using orange fabric. It could be something as simple as that. It could be something like Susie Quilts has great tips in there for her standing sewing desk, which is another big thing that's come out now within everybody working from home and doing their sit-stand desks. People are thinking a little bit more now, like, well, maybe I want to look at getting a sit-stand sewing table. That is covered in the book as well. So there are 15 quilting. I didn't realize that. Quilters. I didn't realize before now how many of them were modern quilters. And there'll be a full list posted. There's on my website there's a blog about the sewing along, which is coming up. The sewing along is really fun because what I've done is I've taken blocks from almost all of these tipsters, and we've put them together into a quilt, and it's called So Grateful for 2021. And you can find out more about that on Facebook. But it's really a lot of fun. There's tons of great prizes from some of the people that are in the book as well. AccuQuilt, the Lap app, Rosalie Brown's Simply Fit board, just all kinds of fun things. One thing that we want to focus on when we are looking at these tips and tricks is how they can best help us in our sewing area. The information that I provide throughout the entire book is not based on what worked for me or what worked for someone else. It's all based on knowledge that I received through all my various certifications. I'm a certified personal trainer. I'm a registered holistic nutritionist. I'm certified in office ergonomics, older adult training, a few more things as well. And so the information that I'm giving you is based on research, is based on guidelines, and it's things that transfer to the general population. There will always be times where you need a little bit of extra something, and that's okay too. And there's lots of different tips in the book too to help with that. So I hope that you enjoy the rest of your time here at QuiltCon. So think about going to the C&T Publishing website. The book is available there. It's also available on Amazon. Have a look through. The table of contents is listed actually on the write-ups for the book. And so have a look through that and see what works for you. And I'm super proud of it. And it's taken, not just 16 years, but actually over 20 years of all the knowledge I've gained throughout the certifications that I've worked with over the years. and how we can best put that forward so that we can sew to 100. That's the whole goal, right?
Hello everyone, I'm Becky Goldsmith. Some of you may know me as Piece of Cake. I am both Becky Goldsmith and Piece of Cake. My new book is called Hand Sewing, and I'm really excited about this book. I've written a lot over the last many years about a variety of hand sewing techniques, but never before have they all been together in one book. So hand sewing has really great instruction, really wonderful patterns, really wonderful pictures that cover needle turn hand applique, wool applique, English paper piecing, hand piecing, and hand quilting. The quilt that is in the book that has all of these techniques did not start out, in my mind, as a book. I designed it as a block of the month, and I designed it as a block of the month that wasn't finished when I started. I was making the blocks just barely ahead of those who signed up for the block of the month. It was really a fun experience, kind of scary. I for sure had to get it done. But what that means is that you could approach this book as a block of the month as well. For those of you who are familiar with books that I've written in the past, you know that the level of instruction is very good, and you'll find that the same is true here in hand sewing. So what's inside? When it comes to applique, I start from the ground up, from how to make templates that are accurate and easy. I've been doing this for years. It's the best way I know how to make templates, to how to make a placement overlay using clear vinyl. What this does is allow you to get your applique pieces in position accurately on the block without ever having to draw on the background. There are clear instructions throughout the book and photographs that show how to trace around your templates on the fabric on a sandboard, and that explain how best to cut out your shapes, leaving the correct seam allowances for needle turn hand applique. I also explain one of the coolest tricks I know for needle turn hand applique, and that is finger pressing. You always, always, always want to turn that seam allowance under and give it a little press with your fingers, turning the drawn line to the back. What that does is make needle turns so much easier, because when you use the needle or a toothpick to turn that edge under, it knows where it needs to go and it turns under more gracefully. I covered the invisible applique stitch in great detail, as well as how to turn an outer point neatly and precisely every time. I explain how you can sew an outer curve without getting unsightly bumps on the outer edges. And this is true on circles or daisy petals, anywhere there's an outer curve. I also show how if you get a pleat, you can fix it so that you will never have unsightly bumps on your circles again. There are cute little basket blocks in this quilt, and the techniques involved in sewing the handles include how to clip and turn under an inner curve, and how to sew what are admittedly very narrow little shapes. There's also a section on how to sew inner points. You have to be careful with inner points so that they don't fray out on you, but you can take an inner point and clip it to and through the line to make beautiful sewn inner points that are structurally sound and will hold up to wear and tear. But there is more in the hand sewing book than hand applique. There's English paper piecing, which is a really fun hand sewing technique. And one of the things I'm especially excited about is working from patterns that are not pre-cut papers. The instructions in the book explain how to print the patterns onto cardstock and cut out the shapes. One of the beautiful parts about cutting out your own shapes rather than buying them already pre-cut is that if you want to increase or decrease the complexity of a block, you absolutely can. This block is drawn with 4 different pieces of fabric here, but in this iteration of the block, I decided to combine 4 and 5 into one shape because I liked it better. It's really fun to be in control of your own papers. There are plenty of instructions for how to prepare your English papers with the fabric that include how big to cut the seam allowances and why you probably want them to be a little bit bigger than 1/4 of an inch. I show how to thread-based and glue-based because I do both. Some shapes are better done with glue, some are better done with thread. And let's face it, everybody has personal preferences. I don't just tell people to sew the shapes together. I give clear instruction about how the stitch is made and also cover set-in seams and when you might need to bend the papers and when to take the papers out and how to take the papers out. When you are making a hand-sewn quilt, hand piecing comes into it, and there are some shapes that are just better to sew with a hand piecing stitch than they are with English paper piecing because it is faster and it's also sturdy and it looks nice. So included in the book are hand piecing techniques that include tracing and cutting out, leaving a correct seam allowance, how to make the stitch, what kind of threads you might choose. There's a lot of information that goes into what is essentially a pretty simple running stitch. If you have gone to the trouble to hand sew a quilt top, wouldn't you like to hand quilt that quilt as well? I know I did. So also included in the book are the instructions for how you layer and baste your quilt, how to prepare the edges so that they're nice and tidy when you're doing your actual hand quilting, and how to make a beautiful hand quilting stitch. I'm seriously into big stitch hand quilting, but this same stitch can be made smaller with shorter needles and finer thread for a traditional close stitch. Sewing by hand is one of the most fun things that I do. It allows me to be productive even when I'm on the sofa watching television. And it calms me down, having something to focus on even amid times of turbulence. It centers me and makes me happy. It is my hope that with this book, you too find the joy that is right there to be had, sewing by hand. Thank you for watching, and may you have many happy stitches.